The cryptic message was an especially cold morning in London, the kind where frost laced the edges of every window pane, and the trees and lampposts stood like twisted silhouettes beneath a pale gray sky. I had just finished my breakfast eggs, toast, and a steaming cup of tea when the summons arrived. A single, nondescript envelope slid beneath my door with a soft thud. Setting down my cup, I felt a chill creep up my spine. Chapter 1. The envelope was plain. No seal, no address, just one word: Holmes. A name that never arrived without consequence. That single word meant one thing: a mystery had begun. My fingers hesitated for a moment before tearing it open. Inside, a scrap of paper. No greeting, no signature. Just a line, hastily scrawled as if written in haste or under duress. Come at once. A matter of utmost urgency. 221 B Baker Street. There was something different this time. No mention of a case, no details, just a direct call to action. The unease in my chest deepened, yet I found myself already reaching for my coat. The cold air outside bit at my face as I stepped onto the frost-covered street. The fog of London clung close, never far behind. When I arrived at 221 B Baker Street, I was struck by an odd silence. The warmth and clutter of Holmes' flat were gone. No violin, no pipe smoke, just stillness. The curtains were drawn, casting heavy shadows across the room. Holmes stood by the window, a motionless silhouette against the mist. "Ah, Watson, come," he said quietly, without turning. "Come in." I stepped inside. The door clicked shut behind me. "What is it, Holmes? What's this about?" I asked. He remained at the window, his hands clasped behind his back in that familiar, thoughtful pose. When he finally turned, his eyes held a strange intensity, one I hadn't seen in quite some time. "This," he said, motioning toward the desk, "is why I called you." I approached, my curiosity piqued. On the desk sat a small wooden box, ornate, intricately carved, and old, clearly worn by time. Its presence was unsettling. I picked it up. It was heavier than it appeared. When I turned it over, I froze. Symbols sipped carefully along the bottom. Not letters, not decoration. Symbols with purpose. A puzzle. I asked. Holmes gave a faint smile, cold and calculating. "Not just a puzzle, a cipher. And not the kind you're used to. Whoever left this, it hid something inside. It's our task to find out what." I examined the markings again. They were precise, almost mathematical, but utterly unfamiliar. "I don't understand," I admitted. "This isn't any code I've ever seen. There's no obvious pattern." "That's the brilliance of it," Holmes said, stepping closer. "It's not meant to be simple. It's meant to test us. Whoever left this didn't just want to pass along a message. They wanted to see if we were clever enough to uncover it." I placed the box back on the desk, unsettled. "But why give this to you?" Holmes' expression darkened. "That's the greater mystery. This box isn't just a cipher, it's a warning. Whoever sent it knows me and they're daring us to follow the trail. But there's more, Watson. This is only the beginning." I blinked. Beginning of what? He turned back to the window, the fog still swirling outside. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, softly, "This was sent by someone who believes they are untouchable, someone who has been watching, and now they've made their move." The words hung in the air, heavy, final. Whatever this was, it wasn't just another case. There was something far darker at play. Holmes glanced at me with a flicker of excitement. "We begin, Watson, with this cipher. Be warned, what we find may be just one piece of a far greater puzzle." I stood by his side, the box between us. The thrill of discovery surged within me, but beneath it, a quiet fear. This time, the stakes felt different, higher, more more dangerous. The game was afoot. But it was a game shrouded in shadows. The ciphers, first C. Louis, sat in silence, the cryptic box between us. Its strange symbols seemed to mock us, whispering secrets just out of reach. The room felt dense, thick with unspoken tension. Holmes stared at the box with unwavering focus. "Holmes," I finally said, "what's our first step?" "Tana." He didn't respond at once. Then, without a word, he stood and crossed to a shelf of books and instruments. He retrieved a magnifying glass and returned to the desk. "As always, Watson, we begin with observation." He held the magnifier up to the box, his eyes scanning every grain of wood. "The material," he murmured, "is aged. Not from any European tree I recognize, perhaps African or South American. Whoever made this had access to rare resources and purpose." He glanced at me. This wasn't thrown together. It was crafted, deliberately. The box itself is part of the message. I leaned in. The symbols, while abstract, seemed arranged. Not random, but patterned, though the pattern eluded me. "Look. Here," Holmes whispered, pointing to one symbol. "See the intersection of lines. These marks connect form a structure. It's as if they align with something. ... But what?" I nodded slowly. "Not decoration. This is intentional. Every line, every curve." Holmes stood, thoughtful. "We are being led down a trail, Watson. This box was left to us, not just to decode, but to prove something, to draw us into something bigger. And you believe it's a trap." "Not a trap," he said. "It's a challenge. It's from someone who believes they can match wits with us. But whoever they are, they've already begun. And we have no choice now but to follow." He stepped back, his silhouette tall against the flickering firelight. I stared down at the box, at the mysterious markings that seemed to pulse in the glow. The first clue had been given, and somewhere in the foggy streets of London, the next piece waited to be found. "Are you suggesting there's another part to this cipher?" Holmes did not answer immediately. Instead, he carefully lifted the box, turning it over in his hands. As he did, I noticed something I had missed before: a faint, almost imperceptible mark on the underside of the box. It was an engraving, too fine to be seen at first glance. He leaned in closely, and I followed suit. "Here," Holmes said, pointing to a small, nearly invisible engraving. "This mark, it's a clue, but one hidden in plain sight. Look closely." I squinted, barely able to make out the delicate script. At first, it seemed like another set of cryptic symbols, but as I focused, the shapes began to blur into something more recognizable: a sequence of letters, painstakingly carved into the wood. "Is it a word?" I asked, confused. "It looks almost like an anagram." Holmes nodded, his expression intense. "Precisely, Watson. This is no ordinary cipher. It's been designed to mislead, to make us overlook its most crucial detail. The letters form a word, though not one we would typically recognize at first glance. This is a key, Watson, and it will lead us to the next step of the puzzle." I ran my fingers over the letters. They were arranged in a sequence that felt almost too deliberate to be random. "What does it say?" Holmes leaned closer, his lips just above the mark, studied the engraving for a long moment. His brow furrowed as he contemplated its meaning. Then, without warning, he spoke softly, almost to himself. "Vox Mysterium." I froze. The words felt like a weight settling in my chest. Vox Mysterium, the voice of mystery. It was a phrase I had heard before in passing, a term often used in connection with certain esoteric societies, secretive organizations that dealt with cryptography and hidden knowledge. But it was not something I expected to find in the case of a simple cipher. Holmes, noticing my surprise, turned toward me, his eyes gleaming. "Do you see, Watson? This is not a trivial puzzle. This is something much more significant, a game being played by forces beyond our understanding. Whoever left us this box did so with the clear intent of guiding us towards something more, something far darker. I swallowed, trying to digest the implications of his words. Vox Mysterium. The phrase had historical connotations, but its true meaning was shrouded in mystery. It was linked to a secret society of sorts, one that had left cryptic messages throughout history, each designed to lead their followers toward an ultimate truth or, perhaps, an ultimate betrayal. This is no ordinary case. Then, I said, feeling a shiver run down my spine. No, Watson, Holmes replied, his voice low and steady. This is the beginning of something much larger than either of us anticipated. But we must press on. This word, Vox Mysterium, is only the first key. We must find what it unlocks. For a moment, we were both silent, the weight of the words hanging in the air between us. I could feel the puzzle deepening, stretching out before us like a labyrinth with no clear end in sight. But despite the unease gnawing at my mind, there was something undeniably thrilling about it, the challenge of unraveling the mystery, the promise of uncovering a hidden truth that could change everything. Holmes placed the box back onto the desk, his eyes already scanning the room for the next clue, the next fragment of the puzzle that would guide us forward. We must not lose our focus, Watson, he said, his tone firm, almost like a command. The game has only just begun. I nodded, my resolve strengthening. There was no turning back now. The cipher had been cracked, but it had led us only deeper into a web of mystery. And, as always, I would follow Holmes, no matter where the trail took us. Where do we go from here? I asked, eager to continue the investigation. Holmes smiled, half in amusement, half in recognition of the challenge that lay ahead. Now, Watson, we find the next clue. We shall visit the library. There is a book I need to consult. I could not suppress a smile. I had learned long ago that whenever Holmes spoke of a book, it was not a mere literary curiosity he sought. There was always something more hidden between the lines, something that only he could uncover. We grabbed our coats, and with the box safely tucked under Holmes' arm, we left 221B Baker Street. Outside, the fog had thickened, and the cobblestone streets gleamed wet under the soft glow of the street lamps. The mystery was growing darker, but we were already moving forward, one step at a time. The game, indeed, was afoot. Chapter 2. The Library's Secrets. The fog was thick outside, a nearly impenetrable wall of mist that seemed to swallow the city whole. Even the gas lamps, flickering dimly along the cobblestone streets, barely penetrated the haze. Holmes, however, moved through it as if he were immune to its weight, his footsteps quick and purposeful, a rhythm I had come to recognize. I followed closely behind, the weight of the box under his arm, a constant reminder of the peculiar nature of this case. Every step, every turn we made, felt as though we were being drawn deeper into something far greater than a mere cipher. We arrived at the library after a short walk. It was an ancient building, one of the oldest in the city, nestled between two towering stone structures that looked as though they had been there for centuries. The facade was dark, worn by time, and the windows were heavy with dust, but it exuded a certain gravitas that Holmes seemed to appreciate. This was no ordinary library. It housed rare books, manuscripts, and texts so obscure that even the most dedicated scholars often overlooked them. Holmes stepped inside without hesitation, his coat trailing behind him, the sharpness of his figure cutting through the shadows of the grand interior. I followed, taking in the smell of aged paper and the soft hum of silence that seemed to pervade the space. The librarian, a thin man with round spectacles perched precariously on his nose, looked up briefly before returning to his work, uninterested in our arrival. Holmes, though, was already moving, his eyes scanning the rows upon rows of books, as if he was searching for something that only he could see. "Holmes, what exactly are we looking for here?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. "A book," Holmes replied briefly, his gaze fixed on a particular shelf near the far end of the room. "A rare one, buried amongst the others. It's the key to understanding the next step of this puzzle." Followed closely, my footsteps quiet on the marble floors. As we approached the shelf, Holmes's fingers lightly brushed the spines of several books, his touch a delicate dance of precision. He paused at a particular book, its cover of faded green leather, the title nearly worn off with age. Without a word, Holmes pulled it from the shelf, its pages whispering as they moved against each other. "This one," Holmes murmured, flipping. The book opened to a particular page. I was expecting to find it here. I leaned over, trying to make out the words on the page, but the writing was archaic, written in a hand that seemed older than the book itself. The words appeared as a jumble of symbols and letters, an indecipherable mess to anyone unfamiliar with the text. Holmes, however, seemed completely at ease, his eyes tracing the lines with a focus I could not hope to match. "This is part of the same tradition," Holmes said quietly, turning the book slightly so I could see better. "The Vox Mysterium," the phrase from the box, ties back to this. A collection of ancient knowledge hidden in plain sight, disguised as obscure manuscripts and texts. The phrase we uncovered is a reference to a much older system of knowledge, one that speaks of hidden truths in secret societies. I furrowed my brow. "You telling me this book is part of a secret society's teachings? How does that connect to the box?" Holmes smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. "Exactly. The book contains clues, fragments of an ancient code. Whoever created the cipher on the box used these very texts as their reference point. This society, Watson, has been active for centuries. Their messages, hidden in the most unlikely places, have never been deciphered by the common man." "But why are we involved, Holmes?" I asked, still struggling to understand. "Why would someone want us to decipher this?" Holmes's smile faded as he carefully turned the pages, each one crackling under his touch. "That, Watson, is the most important question. Whoever left us the box did so because they knew I would come after it. We're not just solving a puzzle. We're being drawn into something far larger, game of intrigue, perhaps even a conspiracy that spans generations." I could feel the weight of his words settle on me. I had known Holmes to investigate the most peculiar of cases, but this was different. The stakes were unclear, and yet there was an undeniable sense that we were uncovering something that had been buried for centuries. Holmes closed the book with a snap and turned towards the librarian, who had been eyeing us with growing suspicion. "We will need access to the rest of the collection," Holmes said curtly, his voice commanding, not leaving room for argument. "There is more to be found here." The librarian blinked, clearly caught off guard by the sudden request. I'm afraid you'll need special permission for that," he stammered, his gaze flicking between Holmes and the book. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly, the intensity of his gaze making the librarian take an instinctive step back. "Have no doubt that you can arrange that, given the importance of the matter." The librarian hesitated for a moment longer, then nodded quickly, as if he had made some silent decision. "Very well, I'll fetch the key. But this is a rare collection. Handle the books with care." As the librarian disappeared behind a set of heavy curtains at the back of the library, I turned back to Holmes, my mind racing with questions. "Holmes, this is getting stranger by the minute. What are we really dealing with? What do these people want from us?" Holmes's eyes flicked toward the closed door as he leaned back against a nearby table, his posture relaxed, but his mind clearly elsewhere. "That Watson is something I don't yet know. But we're not here to ask questions. We're here to follow the trail wherever it leads." He was right, of course. Our role was not to understand everything at once. Our role was to observe, to follow the clues, and to let the pieces fall into place as Holmes always did with methodical precision. And yet, I couldn't help but feel that we were stumbling into a storm, one that would not be easily weathered. The librarian returned with a heavy key in hand, his face pale as though he, too, sensed the gravity of the situation. He led us, through the back rooms of the library, into a small, dimly lit chamber lined with rows of ancient texts. The air was thick with the smell of leather and dust, and the shelves groaned under the weight of centuries of forgotten knowledge. Holmes moved with a sense of purpose, his hands brushing lightly against the books as he scanned each title. "We're looking for something specific," Holmes murmured, his eyes flicking between the spines. "A piece of the puzzle, Watson. We need to find it before anyone else does." I could feel the tension in the air, a taut thread stretching between us and the answers we sought. We were close now, closer than I had ever been to the heart of a mystery. Yet, the closer we got, the more the shadows seemed to gather, the more the unknowns began to close in. Holmes stopped in front of a shelf, pulling down an old, leather-bound tome that looked as if it had been untouched for decades. He turned to me, his eyes gleaming with the quiet satisfaction of a man who had just found his next step. "This is it, Watson, the next piece of the puzzle." I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The game was getting darker, and the stakes were rising. There was no turning back now. "See where this leads," I said, though part of me wondered just how much of this world I truly wanted to understand. The unveiling of the ancient code ****, the book in Holmes's hands, was an imposing presence. It was worn, its leather cover cracked with age, and its pages were yellowed and delicate, but it exuded an aura of undeniable importance. As Holmes carefully laid it on the nearby table, the dust that had accumulated around it seemed to drift away like an omen, a signal that we were about to uncover something far greater than we had anticipated. The dim light of the library flickered across the surface of the pages, casting long shadows that seemed to grow longer by the second. Holmes didn't hesitate. He opened the book slowly, almost reverentially, his fingers brushing over the ancient script as though he were conversing with the long-dead author. I leaned over his shoulder, trying to make sense of the strange language that seemed to dance across the pages. It wasn't a language I recognized, nor was it one that appeared to have any obvious linguistic roots. The characters were angular, sharp, almost like a visual puzzle that seemed to resist the mind's natural attempt at comprehension. "This is it," Holmes muttered under his breath, his eyes scanning the text with an intensity I had come to associate with his greatest moments of discovery. "This book contains the key to decipher the Vox Mysterium." I looked over at him, feeling a surge of apprehension. "Holmes, this doesn't make any sense. What is this Vox Mysterium, and how does it tie in to the cipher we found? What are we dealing with here?" Holmes glanced up, his gaze steady, though there was a distant, almost elusive quality to it. "The Vox Mysterium is not merely a phrase, Watson. It is the heart of a secret society that has existed for centuries, its members pulling the strings of history from the shadows. This book, this collection of text, was created by those who sought to preserve their knowledge, hidden from the world. Their goal is not to reveal the truth, but to cloak it in layers of symbolism, to lead the worthy down a winding path of riddles and ciphers." I stared at the book again, trying to understand the gravity of what Holmes was saying. This was no longer just an intellectual puzzle, no longer just an academic challenge. We were being drawn into something much darker, a web spun by those who had controlled knowledge for generations. But why? Why had they chosen us to unravel their secret and the cipher on the box? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "What does it mean? How does it fit into all of this?" Holmes turned the page with deliberate care, as if each movement were part of some grand, carefully planned action. The cipher is merely a starting point, Watson. A test, if you will. Whoever created it wanted to see if we could decipher it, if we could uncover the truth hidden within their symbols. The symbols are not random. They are a language unto themselves, one that has been passed down through generations. He flipped through the pages quickly, his eyes flicking over each one as though he were scanning for something specific. Okay. Then he paused, his fingers resting on a page halfway through the book. The text on this page was different. The characters were more familiar, the symbols less alien to my eyes. Holmes's eyes gleamed with recognition, and I could see the faintest hint of satisfaction in his expression. "Here it is," he said softly. "The key to the cipher is hidden in plain sight. It's a code within the code." I leaned in closer, trying to decipher the page for myself. The words before me were a mixture of symbols, numbers, and letters. But something about the way they were arranged seemed intentional. There was a pattern to them, a rhythm that hinted at a deeper meaning. Holmes pointed to a sequence of symbols. "Do you see it, Watson? The pattern is evident here. These letters," he said, tracing his finger over a series of seemingly random characters, form an anagram. "It is a hidden message, one that we must unlock if we are to progress." I took a deep breath, my mind racing as I examined the symbols. The anagram, once Holmes pointed it out, seemed almost too simple. It was a trick, of course, a test of patience. The letters danced before my eyes, shifting, rearranging themselves until the phrase became clear. "The secret of the Vox Mysterium is in the blood," I murmured, my voice barely audible. The words seemed to hang in the air between us, a chilling realization settling in my chest. Holmes nodded, his face grave. "In the blood," he repeated, his tone low. "It is the key, Watson. This is where the puzzle begins to unravel. The Vox Mysterium is not just an abstract concept. It is a lineage, a bloodline that has passed down its secrets through the ages. And it is this bloodline that we must now trace." The realization hit me like a wave. This wasn't just about a secret society or an ancient puzzle. This was about people, real individuals who had lived and died, passing down their knowledge through generations, hiding it in plain sight. But why? Why had they kept their secrets hidden for so long? And why had they left us, of all people, the task of uncovering them? Holmes closed the book gently, his expression thoughtful. "It's no longer just an intellectual exercise, Watson. We are now on the trail of something much more dangerous. Whoever is behind the Vox Mysterium, whoever created this cipher, has been playing a long game. Okay? And I believe they are watching us. Okay?" I stood in stunned silence, trying to process the implications of Holmes's words. If we were being watched, it meant that the game was not just about solving puzzles. It was about survival. Whoever was behind this mystery had power, questionless, to control the course of history, enough to manipulate the lives of those who stumbled into their world. Holmes seemed to sense my unease, his sharp gaze turning toward me. "Don't worry, Watson. We've only just begun. Mark my words, this is only the beginning of something much larger. A game of shadows, where knowledge is both the weapon and the shield. And we, my dear fellow, are merely players." The weight of his words settled heavily on me. It was a warning, and yet I knew we could not turn back now. The mystery had already drawn us in, and there was no escaping its pull. Just as I was about to speak, the librarian reappeared at the door, his face pale and his hands trembling. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice anxious, "there's something you need to see. It's urgent." Holmes's eyes flicked toward me, a look of determination flashing across his face. "Let's go, Watson. Seems our next move has already been decided for us." We followed the librarian down the hallway and out of the library, the fog still heavy around us. As we stepped onto the street, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn further into the unknown, into a world of secrets that, once uncovered, would never let us go. The game, it seemed, had just begun in earnest, and I had no idea where it would lead us next. Chapter 3: The Unseen Hand. The librarian led us down a narrow corridor. His footsteps, quick and uneasy, as though he was eager to escape the very room that had given birth to our investigation. Holmes, however, was in no such hurry. His mind, as always, was several moves ahead, dissecting every detail, mapping out the larger game unfolding around us. I followed in silence, my thoughts still entangled in the message we'd uncovered in the blood, a phrase that suggested legacy, secrets, a hidden lineage that had survived for centuries, veiled deliberately from the world. This was no simple message. It was a warning delivered through layers of riddles across generations. Outside, the fog had thickened. It clung to the streets like a damp shroud, curling around the ancient buildings and gas lamps, softening the world into shadows. Even the air felt denser, colder. The faint glow of the lamps barely pierced the haze. My breath floated before me as we stepped into the street. Holmes walked ahead with unwavering purpose, his eyes scanning every corner. His posture had shifted, more alert, more watchful. He wasn't just solving a puzzle. He was preparing for confrontation. "We need to go to the address, Watson," Holmes said, his voice low and certain. "The person behind all of this knows we're close, but they won't act not until we follow the trail exactly as they've laid it out." "What address?" I asked, still trying to make the connection. "The one on the letter," he replied, barely above a whisper. "Okay." The note that came with the box. It was never just a summons, it was the beginning of a game. "Come at once, a matter of utmost urgency. 221B Baker Street." What once felt like a simple message now took on an ominous edge. We hadn't just been called, we had been baited. "Do you think someone expected us to investigate this?" I asked. "Do you believe we're being watched?" "I'm certain of it," Holmes said. "We've been under observation from the very beginning. They're leading us deeper, carefully, deliberately. But we must keep going. Only by following the trail can we learn what they truly want." His words sank in heavily. This investigation no longer felt like deduction, felt like descent. Each clue pulled us further from safety, and the questions continued to multiply. Who were these people? What did they want from Holmes? And why cloak their intentions in riddles and bloodlines? Soon, we arrived at a building tucked deep within an older quarter of London. It was forgotten, its facade worn and quiet, stark contrast to the grand library we had left behind. Curtains blocked every window, and the door, a heavy wooden relic, bore a tarnished brass knocker that hadn't seen use in decades. Holmes stepped forward, undeterred. He raised the knocker and paused, glancing back at me. "This is it, Watson," he said quietly. "The next chapter. We've come too far to turn back now." He knocked. The sound echoed into the silence of the street. We waited. Then the door creaked open. A tall, thin figure stood in the doorway. Shadows concealed most of his face, but something about him struck me as familiar. His eyes glinted coldly. His smile was measured, precise, almost predatory. "Mr. Holmes," the man said, his voice smooth yet unsettling. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." Holmes showed no sign of surprise. He stood firm, unreadable, but I noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw, the sharpening in his eyes. He had expected this meeting, though it didn't make it any less dangerous. "Who are you?" Holmes asked, tone calm but edged with steel. The man's smile widened. "You won't find that answer here, not just yet, okay? But you've come to the right place nonetheless, okay?" He stepped aside. We entered. The hallway was narrow and dim, lit only by a single lamp casting distorted shadows on the walls. He led us to a small room where a large wooden chest sat on a table. Right, resembled the box from earlier, but it was larger, more elaborate. The symbols carved into its surface were hauntingly familiar. My heart skipped. This, the man said, his voice almost reverent, is where your journey ends, or begins, depending on how you look at it. Holmes stepped closer. Another puzzle. The man gave a slow nod. Indeed, Mr. Holmes, but this time you won't be solving it alone. I watched as Holmes examined the chest. His mind was already working, eyes darting over each symbol. Something felt different. This wasn't just intellectual, it was personal. We had entered a game someone else was controlling. The man looked between us, gaze cold and calculating. You've made it this far, he said. Let's see if you can truly unlock the final secret. Holmes didn't answer. His fingers traced the edge of the chest. Open it, the man said, his voice darker now. Let's see if you understand the power of what lies within. Holmes hesitated only a moment before reaching forward. Whatever waited inside. This was no longer just a mystery. This was a reckoning. Chapter 4. The path to the truth. The door behind us shut with a heavy click, sealing us inside the dim room. The sound echoed in my mind, louder than it should have been. Once you open the next door, there will be no turning back. The man's warning hovered over me like a fog I couldn't shake. Holmes, however, pressed forward, and daunted. Its steps were precise, measured, the same relentless forward motion that had driven him through 100 cases. And yet, this one was different. I felt it, the tension in the air, the weight in my chest, the unshakable sense that something had already changed. Each footstep down the narrow corridor felt heavier. Each shadow seemed to watch us. Holmes, I said quietly, what exactly are we dealing with here? The cipher? The chest? That man? What does it all mean? I didn't answer immediately. His eyes flicked across the corridor ahead, reading it like a page in one of his monographs. There was a flicker in his expression, a pause in his thoughts that unsettled me. Then he spoke. Patience, Watson. The answers will come when they are ready to be seen. For now, we continue forward, one step at a time. I nodded, but doubt gnawed at me. Holmes had always been the master of logic, yet something in this case felt beyond logic, beyond reason. When we finally stepped outside again, the fog had returned thicker than ever. It wrapped around us like a living thing, dulling the edges of sound, swallowing the flickering glow of the gas lamps. The world had gone quiet. Still, the streets stretched on like a corridor of secrets, leading into the unknown. And yet, Holmes pressed on, because beneath every shadow, he believed, was truth waiting to be uncovered. London felt more like a dream now, its familiar streets transformed into a maze of uncertainty. Holmes, however, seemed unaffected by the fog or the looming sense of danger. His mind, sharp and unyielding, was already focused on the task at hand. As we walked, he spoke once more, his voice low, but carrying the weight of purpose. Key, Watson, is the heart of the mystery. We've uncovered something ancient, something that has been hidden from the world for generations. But what we are truly seeking, the truth behind the Vox Mysterium, lies within that key. The cipher on the box was merely a test, a way to gauge our ability to understand the language of the mystery. But now that we have the key, we must find where it fits. I glanced at him, my mind struggling to grasp the full scope of what he was saying. And you believe that the key will lead us to the heart of this society? Holmes's eyes flicked to me, his lips curving into a faint smile. The Vox Mysterium is not a society, Watson. It is a secret, a legacy that has endured for centuries. The key unlocks not just doors, but knowledge that has been hidden in plain sight, and the one who holds it controls the path to the truth. I felt the weight of his words settle over me. This was not just about solving a puzzle. This was about uncovering a hidden history. A history that had been carefully concealed by those who had controlled it for far too long. But why had they chosen us to uncover it? What made us the ones to unravel their secret? We continued walking, the fog pressing closer with every step until we arrived at a small, unmarked door on the side of an inconspicuous building. It was barely visible in the gloom, hidden in plain sight, much like everything else we had encountered. In this case, Holmes stepped forward without hesitation, his fingers brushing lightly against the door's cool surface before he reached for the key. For a moment, I could see the flicker of something in his eyes, a brief flash of uncertainty. It was gone almost immediately, replaced by the familiar determination that had always guided him. He inserted the key into the lock with a soft click, and the door creaked open. We stepped inside, and I felt the air grow colder, the silence deeper. The room we entered was small, its walls lined with bookshelves filled with dust-covered tomes and scrolls. A single desk sat in the center of the room, and on it lay a map, spread open as though it had been waiting for us. But it was not the map itself that drew my attention. It was the strange, familiar symbols that adorned its surface, symbols that mirrored those on the box and in the book we had uncovered. The hidden hand behind the veil by the time we stepped back into the fog-laden streets. Night had fallen fully, and the mist clung to the cobblestones like a second skin. Holmes, unbothered by the darkness, moved with quiet determination. The step he took seemed to sharpen his focus, as if the shadows themselves whispered the next piece of the puzzle. I, however, could not shake the feeling that we were being pulled along by a force we neither controlled nor fully understood. Under Holmes's arm was the map now, folded carefully, its cryptic markings etched into my memory as surely as they were onto the parchment. Each symbol, each line, spoke of a hidden history, one meticulously buried by those powerful enough to shape the world from behind a curtain. Holmes, I said hesitantly, what are we really looking for? These locations, these symbols, what do they mean? Holmes's eyes remained fixed ahead, though I could see the calculation in them. He was already dissecting the possibilities. After a long pause, he finally spoke. We are searching for the nexus, Watson, he said, his voice low and steady. Convergence, point the place where every thread connects. These symbols mark the society's touchpoints, centers of influence across centuries, but they're more than coordinates. They're warnings and keys. You believe Vox Mysterium wants to be found? I asked. Why now? Why us? Holmes looked at me, his expression serious, but not without a flicker of excitement. They haven't chosen us out of chance. Whoever orchestrated this, whoever left the cipher, the key, the box, they want something. The question is whether they seek to expose their secrets or to test us before drawing us into their ranks. The thought chilled me. Were we merely investigators now or initiates in some sinister trial? We turned a corner into an alley veiled in shadow, where a small, time-worn building stood. Its stone walls were cracked with age, its windows dark, giving away nothing of what lay inside. This is the place, Holmes said softly. The next step lies behind this door. Every instinct in me screamed caution. There was a stillness in the airy, unnatural quiet. I hesitated. Holmes did not. With practiced certainty, he opened the door. A narrow staircase descended into blackness. We entered, our footsteps echoed down into a low chamber, the air musty and cold. At the far end, a wooden table bore several objects, dust-covered and strange. Among them, another chest, larger than the last, more worn, its carvings deeper, almost wounded. Holmes approached with reverence, brushing dust from the lid. The symbols matched those from the cipher, and the map only older, more weathered, more dangerous. "This is the place," he murmured. "And this, ... this is the next step in our journey." I stepped beside him, unease twisting in my gut. "What are we waiting for, Holmes?" He said nothing, only lifted the lid. The air shifted. The room itself seemed too tense. Inside lay scrawls, ancient, brittle, tied in black ribbon. But at the center rested a box of metal, smaller than the chest, heavier, its surface etched with the same cryptic symbols. But this time, there was something different. A hum, almost imperceptible, as though the box itself was alive. Holmes lifted it carefully, his eyes narrowing in concentration. "This," he whispered, "is where Vox Mysterium begins to reveal itself." I reached forward, touched the box. It was cold, colder than metal should be, and heavy, too heavy for its size. Holmes placed it on the table, examining it closely. He turned it over, traced the engravings. I noticed a flicker of something unusual in his expression. Doubt, or something else, vanished quickly, replaced by the intense focus I knew so well. "This box," he said, "holds the next key, but it won't open with strength. There's a mechanism, a lock we haven't yet understood, okay?" There came a click, a soft, grinding sound. The box resisted him. Something ancient was at play here. Not just a mystery, not just a cipher, but a threshold, the final veil, perhaps, between the world we knew and the one that had been hidden from us all along. This was the moment, I knew, when everything would change. The box was the key. It was the final link in the chain that would connect everything we had uncovered. The cipher, the key, the map hand revealed the truth that had been hidden for so long. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that with every new clue, every step we took deeper into the mystery, we were being drawn further into a world from which there would be no escape. Holmes, ever the calm and calculating investigator, showed no sign of hesitation. His mind was already at work, piecing together the next step in our journey. But I, for one, could feel the weight of what was to come, the final truth that was waiting just beyond the box. The truth that would change everything. It's a key to the veil. Asterisk. The air in the small chamber seemed to grow heavier with every passing second. The low hum of anticipation pulsed through the room as Holmes continued to inspect the enigmatic box before us. His fingers lightly brushed over the cold metal, tracing the intricate engravings with the precision of someone who had spent his entire life deciphering puzzles. I stood beside him, my mind racing. What was it about this box that had eluded us thus far? What could it possibly hold that was so fiercely guarded by a mechanism that resisted even Holmes's expertise? He paused, his gaze fixed on a small, nearly imperceptible seam running along the edge of the box. I watched, captivated by the intensity of his focus. It was as though the box itself had become an extension of his mind, a puzzle to be solved, that had become more than just an object. It was a challenge, one that he would not back down from. "This mechanism," Holmes said softly, almost to himself, "is not one of force. It requires finesse, an understanding of its design. Whoever crafted this knew that it would take someone with a particular set of skills to unlock it." Glanced at the box again, seeing it through Holmes's ease, a series of complex, interlocking parts, each one integral to the whole. The symbols on its surface, the engraving that had initially seemed like mere decoration, now appeared to be a code, a map leading us to the hidden truth. Holmes had been right. The Vox Mysterium had indeed left its mark on every object we had encountered. He leaned forward, his movements deliberate and careful as he aligned the edges of the box with the smallest indentation that had previously gone unnoticed. With a soft click, a faint, hidden compartment sprang open in the side of the box. Holmes's eyes flicked to the opening, and for a split second, a flash of triumph passed through his features. The compartment contained a small, folded parchment, the edges frayed and worn with age. Holmes gently lifted it, unrolling it with the same care he had shown the box. His eyes flicked over the text, and I could see his expression shift, his brow furrowing slightly. I leaned in closer, eager to see what we had uncovered. The parchment was covered in more of the same cryptic symbols that had been present on the cipher, the key, and the map. But this time, there were words, though written in a language so obscure that I could not decipher them. The symbols were not entirely unfamiliar. They were a variation of the same patterns that had guided us up until now. But this time, they had been arranged differently, woven together in a way that suggested something more significant, more urgent. Holmes turned the parchment in his hands, his mind working furiously to translate the symbols. His lips moved silently, as though he were speaking the words to himself. I could see the rhythm of his thoughts, how his mind sifted through layers of meaning, parsing the symbols and connecting them with the information we had gathered. "There is something here," Holmes said, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the parchment. "Okay, the symbols represent a location, another place we must go. But it is not just a place, it is a time, okay? A moment when the society will reveal itself. The Vox Mysterium is not just a network, Watson. It is a force, one that has shaped history from the shadows." I felt a shiver run down my spine. I had suspected for some time that this was no mere intellectual pursuit. This was something much larger, something that would force us to confront not only the society's past, but also its very influence on the present. If Holmes was correct, we are not simply uncovering a forgotten secret. We were stepping into the heart of a hidden world that had been pulling the strings of history all along. "The message is clear," Holmes continued, his voice tinged with a sense of urgency. "The time has come for us to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. We have learned that the Vox Mysterium has been manipulating events for centuries, but now they are preparing to reveal themselves. This parchment holds the key to the location and the moment when they will do so." I stood in stunned silence, processing what Holmes had just revealed. The final piece was not simply a location or an object, it was a moment in time, a revelation that would unravel everything we thought we knew about the world. It was as if we were standing on the precipice of something monumental, a moment in history that had been carefully hidden, obscured by layers of secrecy and manipulation. Holmes folded the parchment with deliberate care, his mind already racing ahead, formulating the next step. "We must go to this location," he said, his voice sharp with determination. "But we must be cautious. Whoever is behind this, whoever has orchestrated this puzzle will be watching us. We are not the only ones searching for answers." I nodded, my mind still reeling. "Where is this place? When does this moment occur?" Holmes looked up, his eyes gleaming with a mix of anticipation and resolve. "The location is not far from here, but the timing is critical. We must be there before it is too late." I felt the weight of his words settle over me. Time was running out, and the more we uncovered, the more we seemed to be walking toward something far greater than we had originally anticipated. There was a sense of finality to this understanding that once we stepped into this next phase of the investigation, there would be no turning back. Holmes turned toward the door, his expression resolute. "We have one last piece to uncover, Watson, and then we will know the truth." I followed him, my thoughts a swirl of questions and uncertainties. As we stepped back into the thick fog that had become our constant companion, I realized that the mystery was far from over. The closer we came to the truth, the more elusive it seemed. We had uncovered a web of secrets, but we still did not know the full extent of what we were dealing with. Whoever had constructed this puzzle had been clever to allow us to easily grasp the full picture. As Holmes moved through the fog, his stride confident, I couldn't shake the sense that we were approaching the heart of a conspiracy that stretched back centuries. It's a conspiracy that had shaped the world in ways we had yet to fully comprehend. The Vox Mysterium was no mere society, was a force, a hidden power that had woven itself into the fabric of history. And now, at last, it was preparing to reveal itself to the world. We had no choice but to follow, but the closer we came to the truth, the more I feared what we would find when we finally did. The final door, it seemed, was opening. And once we crossed its threshold, there would be no turning back. Chapter 5. The Revelation at Midnight. Asterisk. The fog had thickened by the time we reached the location Holmes had identified. The evening had descended quickly, and the street lamps cast long, wavering shadows across the damp cobblestones. London, it seemed, had been swallowed whole by the mist, and as we walked through the narrowing streets, it felt as though the city had become a world unto itself, world where the boundary between the known and the unknown had dissolved. Holmes was walking with a renewed sense of purpose, his eyes scanning every detail, every flicker of movement around us. There was an air of quiet anticipation to his movements, as if he were not just solving a case, but stepping into a long-awaited moment. I, on the other hand, couldn't shake the unease that clung to me like the fog. Every step we took seemed to bring us closer to something dangerous, and yet I knew that there was no turning back. The path had already been set. We arrived at the building that had been marked on the map. It was an old warehouse, abandoned by the looks of it, its stone walls crumbling with age and its windows darkened by years of neglect. The door was heavy and weathered, yet there was something oddly inviting about it, as though it were waiting for us to arrive. Holmes stepped forward without hesitation, his hand gripping the door handle as he pushed it open with a quiet creak. The air inside the building was stale, tinged with the scent of mold and damp wood. The floorboards creaked under our weight as we entered, and the silence inside was oppressive, broken only by the sound of our footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. "This is it," Holmes said quietly, his voice barely a whisper. "The moment we've been waiting for." I looked around the darkened room, trying to make sense of our surroundings. The warehouse was filled with old crates and barrels, their contents obscured by years of dust and neglect. There was nothing to suggest that this place held any significance, but Holmes's expression told me otherwise. His mind was already working, processing the details in a way that only he could. A faint light flickered in the far corner of the room. Holmes's eyes locked onto it immediately, and without a word, he began to move in its direction. I followed closely behind, my mind racing with questions. What awaited us in that corner? Was this the moment when the Vox Mysterium would finally reveal itself? As we approached, I could see that the light was coming from a single, dimly lit lantern resting atop a wooden table. On the table, there were more scrolls, their edges yellowed with age, and several objects arranged carefully beside them. But it was not the objects that caught my attention. It was the figure standing beside the table. A tall man, draped in a dark cloak, stood motionless, his back to us. His presence was commanding, almost tangible, as though he had been waiting for our arrival. The figure turned slowly, his eyes meeting ours in the dim light. "Mr. Holmes," the man said, his voice low and calm, but with an undertone of something far more sinister. "Yes, I've been expecting you." Holmes did not flinch. His expression remained steady, but there was a subtle shift in his posture and awareness of the weight of the moment. "I thought as much," he replied. "You knew we would come." The man's lips curled into a faint smile, though it was more a gesture of amusement than warmth. "Of course," he said, stepping forward. "You've been following the trail, solving the puzzles, unraveling the layers. But you've only scratched the surface, Mr. Holmes. The truth you seek is much more complicated than you can imagine." I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something about this man, something that made the very air around us feel charged with danger. Holmes, however, seemed unfazed. He studied the man with a calm intensity, as if he were trying to discern the hidden motives behind every word, every gesture. "What is it you want?" Holmes asked, his voice steady but tinged with a sharp edge of suspicion. The man's smile widened slightly, and he took a step closer to the table. "What I want, Mr. Holmes, is what has always been desired: power, control, the ability to shape the course of history from behind the veil. You've seen the Vox Mysterium for what it is: a secret society, an ancient order, but you have yet to understand its true purpose." Holmes's eyes flicked toward the table, his gaze narrowing as he studied the objects laid out before us. The scrolls were open, the symbols on their pages unmistakably familiar, though they appeared more intricate, more detailed than anything we had encountered before. "This isn't just about secrets," Holmes said, his voice low, almost to himself. "This is about influence. It's about controlling the very fabric of history itself." "Okay." The man nodded slowly, his expression darkening. "Precisely. The Vox Mysterium has existed for centuries, its members shaping events from the shadows. But now we are on the brink of something greater. The time has come to bring everything to the surface, to reveal the truth to the world." I looked at Holmes, my mind reeling. "And what is this truth? What is it that you're trying to reveal?" The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of grim determination. "The truth is that the Vox Mysterium is not a secret society, as you believe. It is a force and ideology. We are the ones who have shaped the course of history, and now we are preparing to shape the future. The world you know will never be the same." Holmes stepped forward, his gaze never leaving the man. "And you think you can control this? That you can manipulate history with a few cryptic symbols, a secret society, and a network of influence?" The man's eyes darkened, and for a moment I could see a flicker of something more dangerous in his expression. "It is not about control, Mr. Holmes. It's about evolution. The world is changing, and we are the ones who will guide it. You've been following the clues, yes, but you're not ready for what's next." Holmes's eyes narrowed, and he took a step closer to the table, his hand brushing over the scrolls. "What's next?" he asked, his voice low and insistent. The man's smile returned, though it was colder now, more calculating. "You'll see soon enough," he said, his voice laced with a quiet confidence. "But be warned, Mr. Holmes, the truth comes with a price, and you will have to decide how much you're willing to pay." I felt the tension in the room intensify, a heavy silence settling over us. The man's words lingered in the air. And for the first time since this case had begun, I felt a sense of foreboding so strong it threatened to overwhelm me. What had we uncovered? And, more importantly, what were we about to discover? Holmes stood still, his gaze unwavering. The answer, I knew, was just beyond our reach, an answer that would shatter everything we thought we knew about the world, about history, and about ourselves. But before we could move closer to the truth, there was one more obstacle to face. The man stepped back, his eyes gleaming with the certainty of someone who had already won. "It's time, Mr. Holmes," he said. "It's time to reveal the final secret." The game had shifted, and now the final move was upon us. The final secret. The air in the warehouse grew thick with an almost tangible sense of anticipation as the man's words hung in the space between us. "It's time to reveal the final secret," he had said, his voice low, dripping with a mixture of excitement and an unsettling calm. I could feel the weight of those words pressed down on me, the implications of what they might mean swirling in my mind. Whatever was to come, I knew we were at the edge of something far greater than we had expected. Holmes, his expression unreadable, took a step forward, his eyes fixed on the man with an intensity that could cut through steel. He had already deduced more than I could follow, and yet even he seemed to be bracing for something, preparing himself for whatever was about to unfold. "Show us then," Holmes said, his voice cold, devoid of the usual curiosity that had accompanied our previous encounters. This was no longer just a puzzle to be solved. It was a confrontation, a collision of minds, of ideologies, of worlds. The man who had yet to reveal his true identity stepped aside, gesturing toward a large, intricately carved stone archway at the far end of the room. The archway was bathed in the same faint light that had illuminated the lantern on the table. Earlier, it was as if the room itself was drawing our attention to it, pulling us closer to whatever was hidden beyond. I felt a tightening in my chest, a sense that the walls of the warehouse had closed in on us. The faint murmur of my breath, the creak of my boots on the floor, all seemed so loud in the silence. The fog outside had crept in through the cracks in the windows, creating a barrier between us and the rest of the world. We were alone in this room now, and whatever came next was going to shape the course of everything. "Etienne, what do you think?" I whispered, though I already knew he had likely unraveled every layer of this mystery long before I had. Holmes's gaze never left the man. "I think we are about to see something that will change everything, Watson." The man nodded slightly, as if confirming Holmes's deduction. Then, without another word, he moved toward the stone archway. The movement was deliberate, as if he had rehearsed this moment for years. Followed closely behind, my hand instinctively resting on the revolver at my hip. It felt almost absurd now, the idea that I could defend myself from whatever awaited us. This wasn't a mere physical threat. This was something else, something far more insidious. As we approached the archway, the man reached out and pressed a hidden switch embedded in the stone. The sound of grinding mechanisms echoed through the room, and with a low rumble, the archway began to shift, revealing a narrow passageway beyond. "This is where the true history of the Vox Mysterium has been hidden," the man said, his voice reverberating with an unsettling finality. "For centuries, those who have walked this path have understood the power of knowledge. But the world is not ready for what lies beyond." Holmes stepped forward without hesitation, his eyes scanning the passageway, taking in every detail. I followed closely behind, though the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, the anticipation weighing on my every movement. The passage was narrow, the walls lined with strange carvings, their shapes shifting with the flickering light from the lantern the man had carried. The air grew colder as we ventured deeper, the sense of mystery intensifying with every step. It was as if we were walking into the belly of the beast, a place where the unknown was no longer a theoretical construct, but a visceral reality. At the end of the passage, we arrived at a large chamber, its walls lined with massive stone pillars. In the center of the room stood an altar, ancient and worn, upon which lay a single object, a large, ornate book. The book was bound in dark leather, its pages yellowed with age. Its cover was embossed with the same symbols we had encountered earlier, the markings that had led us here, step by step. The man stepped forward, his hands hovering over the book, as if afraid to touch it. "This is the culmination of everything," he said softly. "This book contains the knowledge of the Vox Mysterium, the true history. It's the secrets of those who have shaped the world from behind the veil. This is what has been hidden from the world. This is the final truth." Holmes stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the book. There was a sharp, calculating edge to his expression. He could feel it, the weight of the moment. This was it. This was the truth we had been chasing, the secret that had been concealed for centuries. I felt a strange sense of dread, as if uncovering the truth would somehow unravel the world as we knew it. Holmes, I said quietly, my voice laced with uncertainty. Do we really want to open that? Holmes didn't turn to me. His gaze was fixed on the book, his mind already calculating the possibilities. We have no choice, Watson, he replied softly. This is the final step. We must see it for ourselves. The man, who had been watching us closely, nodded slowly. See, Mr. Holmes, it is not just about knowing the truth. It's about accepting it. The Vox Mysterium has always been about shaping the course of history, about understanding that some truths are too powerful to be known by the masses. Those who seek to control the flow of knowledge hold the power to control everything. Holmes's eyes narrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. And do you think that by revealing this book, you will reshape the world? The knowledge within it will give you the power you seek. The man's smile was small, but it carried a weight of certainty. Not just me, Mr. Holmes. All of us. The Vox Mysterium has always believed that knowledge is power, and that power should be held by those who truly understand it. We are the keepers of this knowledge, and now it is time to reveal it to those who are ready to accept it. Holmes stepped forward, his hand hovering over the book. And you believe that we are ready? He asked, his voice laced with skepticism. The man's smile widened, though there was no warmth in it. You've come this far. It must count for something. Holmes nodded slowly, and without another word, he opened the book. The moment the pages parted, I felt the room shift. The air became thick, heavy, almost oppressive. The carvings on the walls seemed to pulse, their shapes moving as if alive. The words on the pages were written in an ancient script, one I could not understand, but as Holmes continued to read, a strange sensation washed over me, as though the very fabric of reality were bending. The truth, it seemed, had always been hidden in plain sight. The Vox Mysterium had not just shaped history, it had controlled it. And now, with the final secret revealed, the world would never be the same. Holmes closed the book slowly, his expression unreadable, his mind already processing the enormity of what we had just uncovered. He turned to me, his eyes meeting mine, with a mixture of recognition and resolve. We've seen it, Watson, the final truth. But this is not the end. It's only the beginning. Chapter 6. The Price of Knowledge, asterisk. The air in the chamber hung heavy, the stillness pressing in on us, as if the very walls were watching, waiting. Holmes's fingers still rested lightly on the book, his eyes scanning its pages, though I could see the subtle shift in his expression, the way his brow furrowed as he processed the revelation we had just uncovered. He had expected answers, but the truth in those pages, it seemed, had cast a shadow over him, one that he couldn't yet fully understand. I glanced at the man who had led us here, standing by the altar, his face unreadable. His eyes gleamed with a cold satisfaction, as though he had already won not just this game, but the war of ideologies that had been waged in the shadows for centuries. He had laid the pieces before us, and we had followed them, unknowingly, walking right into his hands. Holmes turned the page slowly, his movements deliberate. You understand what this means, don't you? He said, his voice steady, though the question was pointed. This knowledge, this power, it's not just something you can control. It's a force that will change the world, for better or worse. The man's lips curled into a thin, knowing smile. You see, Mr. Holmes, that is where you and I differ. I don't believe in the world changing for the better or worse. I believe in the world changing, period. It's power, knowledge, these things are tools. tools that must be wielded by those who understand their true potential. Holmes looked at him then, his eyes narrowing. "You believe you're the one to wield it?" he asked, his tone shifting, a subtle edge creeping into his voice. The man's gaze remained unwavering. "I don't just believe it, Mr. Holmes. I know it." The room seemed to grow colder as Holmes closed the book with a soft snap, the weight of his gesture marking the end of our journey into the heart of the mystery. But the answers, it seemed, had only opened up new questions that we weren't quite ready to answer. I watched as Holmes stood silently for a moment, his gaze flicking to the book, then back to the man, his mind working through the implications of what we had uncovered. The room was charged with an electricity I could feel in the pit of my stomach. The moment had arrived. Doc's mysterium had revealed its hand, but now the true test was upon us. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence. "You've shown us the truth. What do you want from us now?" The man's smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. He stepped closer to us, his movements measured. "What I want, Mr. Watson, is what you both have already given me, your trust. You've followed the trail, you've uncovered the clues, and now you understand what's at stake. But the price of knowledge is never free." Holmes's gaze remained locked on the man, his expression unreadable. "The price," he repeated, his voice thick with the weight of the words. "Yes," the man replied, his voice low, almost a whisper. "Knowledge, Mr. Holmes, is a burden. It changes everything. And once you understand the truth, you cannot unknow it. You cannot simply walk away from it. There is always a cost." I could feel a shiver run down my spine as the implications of his words sank in. The cost of knowledge. The price we would have to pay for uncovering the secrets of the Vox Mysterium. I could see the tension in Holmes's shoulders, the subtle shift in his posture as he processed the man's words. He knew what was coming. We both did. "Tell us," Holmes said, his voice steady but sharp, as if he already knew what the answer would be. "What is the cost? What do you expect from us now?" The man smiled again, but this time there was no warmth in it, only cold calculation. "The cost, Mr. Holmes, is not one you can pay easily. The Vox Mysterium has lived in the shadows for centuries, shaping the world with its hidden hand. But now the veil is lifting. And those who have sought to control it, to hoard its power, must make a choice. To hold this knowledge, to understand it, there is a price. It demands sacrifice." I felt my stomach tighten at his words, the weight of them sinking deep into my bones. The man's eyes never left Holmes, and for a moment, I thought I saw something in his gaze, something darker, more calculating, that suggested he wasn't just speaking of abstract ideals. He was speaking of something personal, something that would require more than just our attention. Holmes didn't flinch. He stared back at the man, his gaze unwavering. "Sacrifice," he said, the word heavy on his tongue. "Kana. Sacrifice." The man took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "The kind that requires you to give up something you hold dear. Mr. Holmes, knowledge always comes at a price, but it's the personal cost, the one that tests your very character, that is the true price." There was a silence that followed, a moment of shared understanding between the three of us. I could feel the weight of his words press down on me, the truth of them settling into my chest like a heavy stone. This wasn't just a matter of uncovering secrets. This was a choice, one that would have far-reaching consequences. Holmes remained silent, his mind clearly racing, running through the countless possibilities that lay before him. And yet, despite the danger of the situation, despite the overwhelming weight of the knowledge we had uncovered, I saw the familiar spark in his eyes, a spark that told me that he would never back down. He had come this far, and now the mystery was no longer just a puzzle. It was a challenge, one that he would face head on, no matter the cost. Not afraid of sacrifice, Holmes said, his voice steady. We've already sacrificed much in the pursuit of the truth. But you're asking for something else. What is it you really want from us? The man's smile widened slightly, but there was no warmth in it. What I want, Mr. Holmes, is simple. You've come this far, but now you must decide whether you will walk the path to the end. Knowledge, true knowledge, has the power to shape everything. The cost of that knowledge is your willingness to embrace it, to use it, or to destroy it. Holmes nodded slowly, his mind already moving toward the next decision. And if we choose to walk away, if we choose to refuse? The man's expression darkened, his voice becoming colder. Then the vox mysterium will continue to hide in the shadows, and you will live with the knowledge that you could have done something, could have changed everything, but chose not to. The choice is yours, Mr. Holmes. But be warned, knowledge is not something you can ignore once it has been uncovered. The weight of the man's words settled over us, thick and suffocating. We were at the crossroads now. And as we stood on the precipice, I realized that the decision before us was not just about knowledge. It was about what we were willing to sacrifice in order to wield it. The final choice was ours, and I had no idea where it would lead. The price we pay, the weight of the man's words, lingered in the air like a thick fog, the implications of his speech settling in my mind. Each word a stone dropped into the well of uncertainty. The vox mysterium had revealed itself in the most direct way possible, pulling back the curtain to expose a hidden world of knowledge, influence, and power. But the truth, as always, came with a cost, one that was not easily calculated, nor one that we could avoid. Holmes stood before the man, his face a study in concentration. I could see the cogs turning in his mind. The questions stacking up one after another as he processed the true meaning of what had been revealed to us. His fingers brushed against the ancient book once more, as though the very touch of it had become a conduit to his thoughts. We understand what you're saying, Holmes said finally, his voice cool, his tone steady but tinged with the same uncertainty that had settled in my chest. But you're asking for more than just our involvement. You're asking us to accept the consequences of this knowledge, to embrace it. But what if we refuse? The man, who had yet to reveal his true identity, only smiled, small, controlled, and yet somehow filled with meaning. His lips parted, and the words that followed were almost casual, as though he had been expecting the question for some time. Refuse, he repeated, savoring the word as though it were a challenge. Refuse, and you will live with the knowledge of what could have been. You will remain in the dark, hiding from the truth, while those who understand will continue to shape the course of the world. I could feel a sharp tension growing in the room, a sense of finality hanging over us. The man was right in one sense. Refusing to embrace this knowledge, to accept it, meant staying in the dark. But there was more at play here than just the knowledge itself. It was about power, about shaping the future with this knowledge. And power, as Holmes had often reminded me, was a double-edged sword. It could be used to change the world for the better, or it could be wielded in a way that brought devastation. Holmes stepped back from the altar, his gaze never leaving the man. You claimed that knowledge is power, that those who control it shape the world. But how do we know that you aren't simply trying to control us, just as you've controlled the course of history? The man's smile widened, his eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite place, something that was as cold as it was calculating. Mr. Holmes, you are too sharp for your own good. I'm not trying to control you. I'm offering you the chance to control the future, to decide what happens next. You've proven yourself worthy by following the trail, by uncovering the secrets. Now it's time to choose whether you will continue down this path or walk away. I could feel my heart quicken in my chest as the reality of the situation settled in. This was no longer a puzzle to be solved, no longer an intellectual challenge. It was a decision one that would change everything. Holmes had always been the one to solve the mysteries, the one who understood the risks and the rewards. Now, the stakes had grown higher, and the weight of this choice was not one he could make alone. I stepped forward, breaking the silence that had settled between us. Holmes, we can't ignore what we've uncovered. It's Vox Mysterium. It's not just some shadowy society. It's a force, one that has shaped history, but at what cost? What happens when we step into this world of influence and power? Are we ready for the consequences? Holmes turned toward me, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of resolve and uncertainty. He looked at the book once more, the pages now closed, the symbols and the secrets they contained hidden from view. I could see him weighing the options, calculating the risks, as he always did. But this time, the calculation was different. This wasn't just about solving a case. It was about whether we were willing to sacrifice something, whether we were ready to give up a part of ourselves in order to embrace the power that came with the knowledge. There's always a price, Holmes said quietly, his voice steady but heavy with the weight of the decision. The Vox Mysterium isn't just a society. It's an idea, okay? And ideas have consequences, whether we accept them or not. Man's gaze flicked to Holmes, a flicker of approval crossing his features. Exactly, Mr. Holmes. It's not just about knowledge. It's about what you do with it. The power to shape the world, to manipulate the course of history. It's a burden, but it's one that those who are truly worthy can carry. For a moment, the room was still. The decision hung in the air between us, an invisible thread that tied us to the man, to the book, to the secrets that had been hidden for centuries. There was a part of me that felt the weight of it, the responsibility of what we were being asked to accept. Could we really wield this knowledge? Could we control it? Okay? And more importantly, should we? I've always believed that knowledge should be shared, Holmes said, his voice cutting through the silence, that those who possess it have a duty to others. But this is different, okay? This is power. And power isn't something that should be handed out lightly, okay? The man nodded slowly as if he had been expecting this. You're right. Power is dangerous, but it's also essential. For those who control knowledge, control the world. You've seen how history has unfolded. Those who've shaped it from the shadows have done so because they understand that the truth is never simply about what's revealed. It's about what's hidden, what's kept from the masses. I swallowed hard, feeling the gravity of his words. We had uncovered the truth, but in doing so, we had opened a door into a world we could never unsee. It was a world of manipulation, of control, where knowledge was a weapon, and those who wielded it shaped the course of everything. But was that a world we could live in? Was it a world we should allow, Holmes? I said quietly. If we choose to accept this, if we choose to walk this path, what does that mean for us? For the world? Holmes paused, his gaze flicking from the man to the book. He was silent for a long moment, the weight of the decision settling over him like a fog. Finally, he spoke, his voice steady but filled with an intensity that I had not heard before. It means that the world we know is about to change, and we must decide whether we are the ones who will shape it or if it will shape us. The final decision had been made. We had chosen the path. But as Holmes closed the book once more, I realized that there was no going back. The truth had been revealed to us, and now it was time to confront the consequences. The price had been set, and we had no choice but to pay it. Chapter 7. The shifting balance, the weight of our decision, hung in the air like an unspoken truth. The tension thickening with every passing second. Holmes had made his choice, and in doing so, he had pulled us into a world far darker and more complex than anything we had encountered before. The book was closed, but its contents and secrets were now alive in our minds. shaping the future in ways we could not yet comprehend. I stood beside Holmes, the realization settling heavily on my chest. The path we had chosen was one that could never be undone. There was no return now. The knowledge, the power that came with it, would forever alter the course of our lives. But what would that change bring? What would we have to sacrifice along the way? The man who had led us here, the architect of this revelation, watched us closely. His expression remained steady, though his eyes glimmered with a quiet satisfaction. He had been expecting this moment, I realized. He had known that we would reach this point, that the lure of knowledge would pull us in, that the temptation of power would be too great to resist. "Well," he said, breaking the silence, his voice low but tinged with something darker. "You've made your decision. But understand, choosing this path will change everything. You'll see the world differently, understand things you've never even imagined, okay? And once you've seen it, there's no going back." Holmes's eyes never left the man, his gaze sharp and calculating. "We understand that," he said, his voice steady, betraying no hint of doubt. "But what exactly is it you want from us now? You've shown us the knowledge, the power. What happens next?" The man stepped closer, his movements slow, deliberate. "What happens next is up to you. You've unlocked the door to a new world, but what you do with that knowledge will determine everything. You can use it to shape the future, to control events as you see fit, or you can walk away, live with the consequences of your actions, and let someone else decide." I could feel my pulse quicken as the implications of his words settled into my mind. The weight of it all seemed to suffocate the air in the room. We were standing at the edge of a precipice, looking out at an unknown future, unsure of where it would lead. But one thing was certain: we could never go back to the way things had been. The world had just shifted beneath our feet, and we were now part of something much larger than ourselves. Holmes was silent for a long moment, his eyes flicking from the man to the book, then back to the darkened room. The stillness stretched out between us, thick and heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but filled with a sense of finality. "Then we move forward. We move forward," Holmes said, his words deliberate. "But understand, we will not be controlled, not by you and not by anyone. We will use this knowledge, but we will decide how to wield it." The man's lips curled into a thin smile, though there was no warmth in it. "Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice soft but filled with a quiet menace. "You still don't understand, do you? No one can ever truly control knowledge. Knowledge controls you. You are just a vessel for it, a tool, and once it's in your hands, there's no turning back." Holmes stood unmoving, his expression unreadable. I could feel the tension between them, a quiet battle of wills that neither was willing to concede. The man had laid out the stakes, and now it was up to us to decide how to play the game. "Then let us see where the game takes us," Holmes said finally, his voice steady, as though he were making a promise to himself, to me, and to the man standing before us. "We've come this far. Now we move forward." The man gave a sharp nod, his eyes gleaming with something dark and knowing. "Very well. But understand this, Mr. Holmes. You've just opened the door to a world of shadows. And the more you know, the harder it becomes to see the light. Once you've crossed this threshold, you'll never look at the world the same way again." I felt the weight of his words settle deep in my chest, the gravity of them pressing in on me like a physical force. The knowledge we had gained, the power we had unlocked, had opened up a new reality where the boundaries between right and wrong, truth and deception were no longer so clear. The choices we made from this point forward would define not just our lives, but the course of history itself. "Let us go," Holmes said, his voice cutting through the tension, his decision final. "We have seen enough." The time for contemplation. It's over. It's time to act. The man did not try to stop us, nor did he make any further attempt to influence our decision. Instead, he simply stepped aside, as if our departure was the inevitable conclusion to this encounter. "Very well," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You may go. But remember, Mr. Holmes, what lies ahead is not for the faint of heart. The Vox Mysterium has shaped the world for centuries, but now it's your turn to shape it. And with that power comes a responsibility that few can bear." Holmes gave him a final glance, his eyes steady and unwavering. "We'll bear it," he said simply, then turned toward the door. I followed him, my heart pounding in my chest as we stepped back into the foggy streets of London. The world outside had not changed, but I knew that we had. We had crossed a line, made a choice, and there was no turning back. As we walked through the dimly lit streets, the weight of the man's words continued to echo in my mind. The Vox Mysterium had given us the key to the world's hidden knowledge, but it had also shown us the price of wielding it. The burden of power was not something to be taken lightly, and now we had to decide how we would use it, whether we would shape the future or allow ourselves to be shaped by it. For the first time, I could feel the full weight of the responsibility that had been placed on our shoulders. The future was now ours to command, but what would we do with it? Would we become the masters of the knowledge we had uncovered, or would it consume us as it had consumed so many before? We were at the threshold, standing on the edge of something greater than ourselves, and the only question left was whether we would be able to control it, or whether it would control us. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The game was no longer just about solving a mystery. It was about survival and about shaping the world in our image. And I knew, as we walked into the night, that nothing would ever be the same again. The turning point. The streets of London were eerily quiet as we walked in the thick fog that clung to the city like a shroud. The familiar sounds of the bustling metropolis seemed muffled, as if the very city itself had retreated into a dreamlike haze. Holmes walked ahead, his posture upright, unyielding, as though the weight of the world rested on his shoulders. I followed, unable to shake the sense of urgency that had taken hold of me, that had taken hold of both of us. The knowledge we had uncovered everything the Vox Mysterium had shown us was like a seed planted deep in our minds. It grew in silence, its roots spreading through every thought, every action, pushing us towards something we weren't yet ready to face. Holmes had made the decision. We had both made it. But the real question now was, where would it lead? As we walked, I stole glances at him, my thoughts churning. The power we had gained from the Vox Mysterium was undeniable. We had seen its potential, its vast reach. But it was also clear that with that power came a responsibility, one far heavier than I had anticipated. The question we had to ask ourselves wasn't just what we would do with it, but who we would become in the process. "What do we do now?" Holmes asked, the question spilling from my lips before I could stop it. "Where does this path take us?" Holmes didn't break stride, his eyes fixed ahead as if he were already seeing a future that I couldn't yet comprehend. "We've chosen this, Watson. Now we act. The world has been shaped by those who hold power. Those who understand the truth are the ones who control it." I thought about his words as we continued down the fog-lightened street, a mind struggling to catch up with the reality of what he had said. Power, control. It was all becoming clearer now, but the clarity came with a price that no amount of knowledge could prepare us for. We passed through several winding streets, the city's skyline barely visible through the mist. Despite the tension in the air, there was something strangely calm about Holmes. His demeanor had not changed since we had made our decision. It was the same as always, focused, unwavering, his mind running through calculations that I couldn't yet grasp. But what was he thinking? What did he see that I didn't? Finally, After what felt like an eternity of walking, we arrived at a small, unmarked building on the edge of a quiet square. The fog had begun to thin, and the first hints of dawn were beginning to break through, painting the sky with soft hues of purple and orange. Holmes stopped in front of the door, his fingers brushing against the handle. There was no sign, no indication of what lay within. Yet I could feel the sense that this place held the next piece of the puzzle, the next step in our journey. "What is this place?" I asked quietly, my voice tinged with both curiosity and apprehension. Holmes turned toward me, his face unreadable. "This is where we confront the truth, Watson. The final truth." I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "And if the truth is more than we can handle?" Holmes's eyes flicked toward the door, his gaze distant for a moment. "Then we face it. There is no running from this now." He opened the door, and we stepped inside. The room we entered was dimly lit, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch across the walls. The air was thick with dust, as if this place had been untouched for years. At the far end of the room stood a large table, cluttered with papers, maps, and strange ancient artifacts. The walls were lined with shelves, each filled with books that seemed to belong to a different time, a different world. But what caught my eye immediately was the figure standing at the center of the room, a man draped in a long cloak, his face hidden in shadow. He stood motionless, his hands clasped behind his back, as though waiting for us. Holmes did not hesitate. He stepped forward, his voice steady. "We've come for the final piece." The man did not move at first, his silence adding to the tension in the room. Then, slowly, he turned to face us, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His face was pale, almost ghostly, with sharp features that seemed carved from stone. His eyes, however, were the most unsettling, piercing, cold, and filled with a strange kind of knowledge that I could not comprehend. "You've come, Mr. Holmes," the man said, his voice deep and resonant, carrying a weight that seemed to press against us both. "You've come for the truth, but you must understand that truth is not always what it seems." Holmes did not flinch. "I'm aware," he replied coolly, "but I've already seen enough to know that the truth must be faced, no matter the cost." The man's lips twitched into something resembling a smile, though it held no warmth. "You speak of cost, but you do not yet understand what it means to pay it. Knowledge is not just a gift, Mr. Holmes. It is a curse. Those who seek it, who think they can wield it, will find themselves changed in ways they cannot foresee." I could feel the weight of his words, the chilling sense that we were standing on the precipice of something far beyond our control. The Vox Mysterium had shown us the power of knowledge, the power of those who controlled it. But now we were beginning to understand the darker side of that power, the consequences, the sacrifices that came with it. Holmes stepped closer to the table, his eyes scanning the papers and artifacts that littered its surface. There were maps, old and frayed at the edges, some marked with the same symbols we had encountered before. There were books, their pages yellowed with age, their titles in languages that I couldn't recognize. But in the center of it all was a single object, small, intricate box, surface engraved with the same cryptic symbols that had haunted us throughout this journey. "Steve Holmes said, his voice low, is what we came for." The man nodded slowly. "Indeed, that box contains the final answer, the culmination of everything you've sought. But once you open it, you will understand that the truth is not so simple. Knowledge is a tool, Mr. Holmes, but it can also be a weapon." Holmes's gaze never wavered as he reached for the box, his fingers brushing against the cold surface. He hesitated for a moment, as if sensing the gravity of the decision he was about to make. And then, with a single, deliberate motion, he lifted the lid. Inside the box lay a small ancient Keats design unlike any I had ever seen before. It was beautiful, intricately crafted, and yet there was something unsettling about it, as though it held a power that could not be fully understood. The man's voice broke the silence. "That key, Mr. Holmes, is the key to the future. But it comes with a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Holmes did not hesitate. He closed the box gently, his eyes still fixed on the key. "We've already paid the price," he said quietly. "Now we move forward." As he turned to leave, I felt the weight of the choice we had made settle over me like a shroud. The future was now ours to shape, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking toward something far greater than we had anticipated, something that could change the world forever. The question now was not whether we would survive this journey. The question was whether the world would survive us. Chapter 8. The Unraveling Path. Asterisk. The key, small and unassuming, sat in Holmes's palm like the weight of the entire world. The faint light that filtered in from the fog outside seemed to catch on its edges, casting fleeting shadows that made it appear to shift, to grow larger with each passing second. Despite its delicate craftsmanship, there was something undeniably ominous about it. It wasn't just an object. It was a symbol of the choices we had made, the road we had chosen to walk, and the consequences that would come with it. Holmes stood motionless, his gaze fixed on the key. His mind, I could see, was already working, already moving through the possibilities, the next steps, and the potential dangers. There was a part of me, too, that understood that the moment, we had just crossed the moment when Holmes had opened the box and revealed its contents, marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of something far darker, far more dangerous. "Holmes," I said quietly, breaking the heavy silence between us. "What now? What is this key for?" Holmes's fingers tightened around the key, and for a moment his eyes flicked to me. There was a flicker of something in his gaze, a moment of vulnerability, if only for an instant. But then it was gone, replaced by the familiar sharpness I had come to recognize as his mind working at full capacity. "We use it," Holmes said, his voice steady, though I could sense the gravity. In his words, "The key isn't just for unlocking doors, Watson. It's a key to the future. It will guide us to the next phase of this investigation, and then we will decide what to do with the knowledge we've uncovered." I looked at the key again, my mind struggling to make sense of the vast implications. The Vox Mysterium had shown us the power of knowledge, the control it granted those who held it. But now we were part of that world, and the key, it seemed, was not just a physical object. It was a passageway into something much larger. "The final stage is upon us," Holmes continued, as if reading my thoughts. "The Vox Mysterium has always operated in the shadows, but the time for hiding is over. We are about to see what happens when knowledge is no longer contained, when it is allowed to spread." I felt the weight of his words settle in. The Vox Mysterium was not merely a society, it was an idea, a force, and now that we had the key, we were no longer just observers. We were participants in something much greater, something that had the potential to reshape everything we knew. "What does it mean, though?" I asked, my voice low, uncertain. "What is the next step? You've seen what this society can do. What do we do now that we have the power to change things?" Holmes turned to face me, his gaze unwavering, his expression calm but intense. "We decide, Watson. We decide whether we use the knowledge we have gained for good or ill. We decide whether we become the ones who shape the world or whether we let the world shape us." It was a stark choice, one that carried the weight of history on its shoulders. We had uncovered a force that had been hidden for centuries, a force that had shaped every event, every moment, from the shadows. And now we were standing at the precipice, the key in our hands, ready to unlock the next chapter. Holmes placed the key carefully into his coat pocket, as if acknowledging, its significance. Then he turned to the man who had led us here, the one who had shown us the truth. The man stood silent, watching us closely, his face unreadable. "You've seen the truth," the man said softly, his voice filled with an odd mix of pride and caution. "But the truth, Mr. Holmes, is not something that can be unlearned. Once you know it, you cannot return to ignorance." Holmes nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the man. "We've made our choice," he said firmly, "and we will live with the consequences. But now, we need to understand what comes next." The man stepped forward, his face cold and calculating. "What comes next is simple. The Vox Mysterium has waited for centuries. It has operated in the shadows, manipulating history, shaping the world in ways you cannot begin to understand. But the time is now. The veil is lifting, okay? And when it does, the world will be forever changed." For a moment, I felt the air around us thicken, as if the very room was holding its breath. The man's words were like a promise, a warning, and a threat, all rolled into one. This was it, the moment when everything we had learned, everything we had uncovered, would either come together or unravel in a way that we could not predict. "The world will change, Mr. Holmes," the man continued, his voice low but filled with conviction. "The key you hold is not just for unlocking the next stage of your journey. It is the key to the future. It will guide you, but be warned. Knowledge is not something you can control. It controls you. And once you let it in, once you embrace it, you will never be the same." Holmes's eyes flicked to the man, his expression unreadable. "And what do you want from us now? Why reveal all of this? Why bring us into your world?" The man's smile returned, though it was thin and cold. "You have already been brought into this world, Mr. Holmes. The moment you accepted the knowledge, you became part of it. I merely gave you the key. What you do with it is up to you." The weight of his words hit me like a physical blow. The man was right there, was no going back now. The Vox Mysterium had shown us the truth, and in doing so, had changed us. The knowledge we had gained was no longer just information, it was power, and it was something we could not ignore. Holmes's eyes narrowed, his mind already racing, calculating the next move. "Then what happens now? What do we do with this power we've been given?" The man's smile faltered, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "You'll see soon enough. But understand this, there is a price to pay for knowledge. The more you understand, the harder it becomes to hold on to. And once you begin this path, there is no going back." Holmes did not flinch. "We've already made that decision," he said, his voice resolute. "Now, show us the way forward." The man nodded slowly, his eyes gleaming with something darker than before. "Very well," he said, his voice soft but filled with finality. "The time has come. Follow me." Without another word, he turned and began walking toward the far side of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. Holmes followed without hesitation, and I fell in step behind him. We were no longer just seeking answers. We were about to face the consequences of the choice we had made, the cost of the knowledge we had uncovered. As we moved deeper into the chamber, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being drawn toward something far greater than ourselves. The key had opened a door, but what lay on the other side? Would we be the masters of what we had unlocked? Would we become its slaves? The journey had only just begun, and already it seemed as though the world would never be the same again.